Hello, and welcome to Self, the Letting Go series. This is for emotional wellness for men. My name is Courtney Brame, and today we're going to just continue through. Last was section 5, and we covered the topic of grief, understanding grief outside the context of losing somebody in your life. And as we're going through the scale of emotions based on the work of David R. Hawkins, the book is titled Letting Go. I advise you to download it, buy it, read it, listen to it, however you best consume information, because this is really helpful in understanding emotions and being able to recognize what they mean so that we can utilize them in the way that they're supposed to be. All right. Today, we're going to be covering the topic of fear. So, with this, we will go ahead and uh, we'll do more moving today than we have before. So it might be slightly distracting to hold some of these poses, but I invite you to create more stillness in your mind so that we can best, as we hold and maintain our postures, um, so that we can just create that sense of alignment of mind and body. I mentioned before, like what we believe is often going to be consistent with what our beliefs are. And once we look at it and we recognize those inconsistencies, we can start to challenge them and live a better life, one that's more aligned with how we want to live. All right. So, just like always, we'll do a little warm up. I'm going to read through my notes of the chapter, and we're going to be able to just settle this into our being, our bodies, our minds as well. All right. So, from wherever you are, I invite you to go ahead and have a seat. You can sit down with your legs crossed, your bottoms of your feet can touch one another, or you can sit how I'm sitting. I like to utilize blocks. This is just better for my hips. I have tight hips. If you're somebody who experiences tight hips as well, this is something that will help you and be more supportive to you as you have to sit for long periods of time rather than just sitting directly on the floor. Okay, it elevates your hips to where you can do more of the postures. I invite you to, at this point, if you don't have things like blocks or any sort of straps, to maybe consider getting something like that for your practice. This will be good for you, not just for these classes, but also for your body as you do stretches and anything that is going to be supportive and useful to your own movement. All right. So, as you settle into your seat, what I invite you to do is to bring your awareness to your space. Normally, we do things with our eyes closed, right? And since today we're going to be covering the topic of fear, perhaps it would be good for us to keep our eyes open and remain aware of what our surroundings are. So I invite you to look over to the left, and you can just say to yourself, nobody's here. You can just say what you're seeing. Just start naming the things. You can say it out loud. You can just think it to yourself. And in addition to what you're seeing, right, start to just name the features of it. Last time, our homework for our grief class was to recognize and identify where perhaps we have a strong attachment of identity to an aspect of our life, and then to begin to sort of break that down, deconstructing the thing we are attached to, that our identity is attached to, right? Something supportive to that exercise is to notice something, let's say like a chair, for instance, right? So it's a chair. It's a chair that has a back, right? It has 4 legs. Objectively naming features of the chair. We don't have to go into the chair's history, what it's made out of, what it's done for us, who sat there, none of that. Just objectively naming, maybe the shape, the color, if there's something that has words on it, right? Now bring your attention over toward the right side of the room and do the same thing. And the reason that this is so useful for the portion of the fear emotion is because part of getting through fear, letting go of fear, is to begin to just see things for what they are. Now look straight in front of you. Perhaps you have something across from you that you can look at, you can name it, you can break down what it is, right? So objectively, we know where we are, we know what we're surrounded by, And we've also been able to break that down. Okay. So we recognize that by this point, we are in a safe place, a place that is safe for us. And now the way that we'll begin is we'll just go ahead and go into our 4 movements of the spine, but this time on all fours. All right. So come into a tabletop position with your hands underneath the shoulders, knees underneath the hips. And from here, you can take a big inhale, drop the belly down toward the mat. Gaze goes up toward the ceiling. And then as you exhale, begin to bring your belly button to your spine, round your back. Okay. Do that one more time. Take an inhale, belly goes down toward the mat. Exhale, belly to spine. Now, as you do this, go ahead and tuck the toes behind you and then really separate the fingers on the hands. All right. And then just slowly rock back and forward. So we're stretching out the feet, we're stretching out the fingers, we're stretching out the wrists as well. Okay. And then inhale forward, exhale back. Oh, you might feel some cracking. Maybe you feel compelled to take some rotations of the spine. If you did take those rotations, go to the opposite direction. And if you decided not to take the rotations, you can just continue to go cat cow at your own pace. All right. When you go back through center, go ahead and turn your fingers pointing out to the sides on the side of each room. And then you can just rock your body left to right, stretching out the wrists. If you want to continue making circles in one direction, go ahead. And then reverse directions, stretching out the wrists and the forearms. Okay. Now take your fingers back, facing forward, away from your body. And now lean all your weight into your knees and then your left hand so that you can pick up your right hand. And we're going to lower the fist down onto the earth, starting with your fingernails to the knuckles to the back of your hand. So now we're stretching out the back of the wrist and forearm by trying to roll the back of our wrist forward onto the mat, keeping more of our weight on in our hips, knees, and in our left hand. All right, on your next exhale, go ahead and begin to peel those fingertips off the ground. Shake your right wrist off around in both directions. And then next, we're going to do that same thing, but for the other side. So bring your weight into your knees and your right hand. Lift the left hand off the ground. Lower the fingernails, fingers, knuckles, fist down onto the earth. And begin to stretch out the back of that left wrist this time. All right, inhale and go ahead and peel that left hand. Make a couple of wrist circles in either direction. All right. Next, take your knees out wide, about as wide as the mat is. Bring your big toes together and then press your palms into the earth, extending the elbows, and then reach your hips back toward the back of the room. And then you can try and lower your forehead down to the mat. Take a couple of big breaths here. This time we're going to breathe into the back. Full inhale, full exhale. Take another breath in, and on your exhale, begin to walk your hands over toward the right side, keeping those arms extended. You'll feel a lengthening along the left side of the body. Try and press that left hip down into that left heel to keep your hips from coming up in the air. We don't want to lose anything from this stretch here, all right? Take another breath. On your next exhale, walk your hands over to the opposite side. And this time we're pressing that right hip into the right heel. Feel that lengthening along the right side of the body. Take a breath in, exhale, walk your hands over to center. And then you can begin to make your way back into that tabletop position, coming on all fours, wrists beneath the shoulders, knees underneath the hips. Take a big inhale, reach that right arm up to the sky, fingertips wide and separated, creating all the tension and just trying to separate your fingertips. And then on your exhale, take the back of the right arm underneath you, going behind the left wrist, lowering that right shoulder, right ear down to the earth for a spinal twist. And then take an inhale, push up into the left arm, unwind, bring that right arm back up to the sky. And exhale, lower the right hand to the earth. Take a big inhale. This time, lift the left arm up toward the sky, separate the fingertips, extend them up toward the ceiling. Exhale, take the back of the hand down and through behind the right wrist, lowering the left ear onto the ground. Twisting the spine on the other direction, okay? Inhale, press into that right arm. Come back, unwind, extend the left arm. And as you exhale, lower the left hand down to the earth, okay? All right, so I know that we always start this way, but we're going to start this way again. And the first pose that we'll take is going to be with our feet out in front of us. All right. Bring your toes up towards your nose. Legs extended. Take a big inhale, arms up overhead. And as you exhale, hinge at the hips as much as you can. Feel that lengthening through the hamstrings or the muscles above the knee behind the quads. And then rest your hands at your toes, ankles, or your shins. And we'll be here for 3 minutes. So here we are, chapter 6, fear. Fear can be described as free-floating anxiety and panic. Some of the features are that it can be paralyzing, and paranoia is one expression or an extreme of it. And this is also best described as a feeling of, it's a little different than a feeling of unease, right? In fear, what can happen is we can dismiss it as being shy. We might become shy. We might become speechless. We could even get defensive or suspicious. We could even feel trapped. These are all descriptions of fear or expressions of fear. And what we need to accept is that there will be fear of everything, including fear itself. Rejection, poverty, a feeling of stuckness, inadequacy, disapproval, decision making, authority, change, loss of security, loss of control, even fear of feelings. These are all things that can come up under the guise of fear, or what fear tends to fuel. As we begin to let go of fear, what happens is that there is often anger, and it's anger of fear. So what happens is that we can become free from the anger as we begin to move through that anger to get up to a place of pride and courage. Remember, anger has a lot of energy behind it. So if we get to a place of, being afraid, having fear, and then we get mad about the fear itself, we can work our way up to pride and then courage, which is a positive emotion. All right. When we begin to learn that this is what fear is, we start to let it go, because it's just a feeling. And I say just a feeling. I don't want to dismiss what feelings are or what they can motivate from people or what they mean, by no means. But when we say, like, it's only a feeling, I think that it it can either diminish the value of what we feel about it, and we might even create some guilt around not being able to see fear as a feeling. But there's something liberating about it. Oh, it's just a feeling. It's just a feeling, right? It's not something that's going to cause harm. It's not something that can tangibly hit me or hurt me or bite me. I can't even see it or touch it or feel it. Steve the Dean, he's a men's coach. He says this too. He says, put your arm out, grab that. That's your arm. Now, can you grab fear? I think that was what he said. I remember this from, it was a summit for Mr. Lucario, the Bad Boys Club. Shout out to them. The Bad Boy membership, not club. Wow. All right. So Through this, what happens is that we learn that fear brings about fearful thoughts. The fear emotion brings about fearful thoughts, and it creates a cycle of just fear. It's more fear begetting more fear. When we start to hold the fear, what happens is that it keeps telling us a story that we'll keep listening to until we begin to unpack it and learn through the experience that while that thing we fear may never happen, if it does, what happens is that we learn that it's quite human not only to have fear, but also that the fear of that thing happening is a thing. So, as we talked in the beginning about this looking around exercise, right? We see what it is and we're able to objectively see the thing. So, if you have a fear of chairs and you're able to look at the chair and go, okay, there's a cushion on it to sit on, there's a back to it, it has legs, right? You can start to practically see it for what it is. And go ahead and take an inhale and make your way out of this posture as we start to not just look at the chair, but we start to look at other things around the chair, right? Being able to look at things for what they are helps us to unpack the truth of them. And then we can differentiate the truth of it between or from the story that we tell ourselves about it, right? I don't need to know who this chair came from, who had it before me, right? Because we can get into a cycle of what if this chair was owned by a serial killer and the cops are going to come looking for me because this chair has evidence on it. And they're going to think I did it. And this is such an extreme example, but this is the kind of thing that fear will do to us if we're unable to unlock or differentiate between, the objective of a situation or a thing and identify the truth because we'll just let our mind spiral us into all these different emotions. Go ahead and bring both feet in. You can take the bottoms of your feet together. Knees are out wide. You can grab the pinky toe side of your feet with your hands and then begin to press the elbows into the inner shins or the inner thighs. And then lift your chest up forward for a butterfly stretch. Try and keep your heart lifted as you continue to take these deep breaths. And if you start to feel any pain or discomfort, please extend your legs and stretch yourself out, okay? So, when it comes to fear, something that is healing is another emotion, love. Given that fear is so linked to survival, oftentimes we have systems in place to conquer fears. Yet, our media, as an example, it gives us so many opportunities to conquer that fear because it's pushed onto us. What happens is that it creates a fear of living and a fear of death. So, what do? Our media, our messaging keeps us in this state of fear about living our life, being alive in itself, being scared of things, and then we're also afraid of death. That is how fear manifests, even at its most simple level, from life to death on this spectrum that everyone has to experience. If you're living, you're going to die. So, what does fear do for us? It just kind of guides us in the direction of being afraid of a thing, but it inherently makes us fearful. It inherently makes us fearful. In extremes, what we see are fears even existing. What happens is that it can start with something as simple as, having wanting something. Let's say that. Like, let's talk about wanting to do something, thinking that, let's give it the example of playing sports. Like, I want to be good at sports, right? So, as I look at wanting to play sports, there are components of it. I have to practice the sport, right? And if I'm practicing, I like to think that I'm getting better at the thing that I'm practicing because the more we do a thing, the better we should get at it, unless we're doing it bad from the start. But that's a whole nother conversation, right? So, wanting to play sports, there are all types of fears that can come along with it. Maybe fear of judgment from other people who do play the sports, maybe even imposter syndrome, right? Like, oh, I'm getting great at this, but there are people who've tried and worked so much harder than me. There are people who are in different leagues. If I was good at it, then I would be better than so and so. And we can get into these comparison cycles. We can get into these, we can discourage ourselves. We can lose motivation. We can lack motivation. And this is just over, an attempt to do something. And then there becomes the fear of quitting and being seen as a quitter. And so we can start to put our identity and attachment with things in our life. Like, I use sports as an example, but from the spectrum of life to death, how many things do we encounter that our identity can become attached to? I'm talking about sports. So identity as an athlete, identity in your job, identity in your community circles, right? We've talked about this. So as we begin to let go of all those thoughts that we might be having on the spectrum of what it means to play a sport, practice, get good at it, not get good at it, right? We can start to let go of each of those things. We can begin to just let them go. We might be avoiding imposter syndrome, so we might underperform in our sport. So we got to let go of that feeling of inadequacy or not being seen as good enough or heard as good enough or perceived as being good enough. The thing is that love and genuine connection are mechanisms of reassurance, and one's presence can silence one's fears. It's not our words, but it's our presence that is healing. Fear in itself is healed by love. Go ahead and bring your feet from touching each other, and you can extend your legs. You can pedal out the knees a bit. Okay. And then what we'll do next is we'll go ahead and switch it up here. We'll come onto all fours, knees underneath the hips, hands underneath the shoulders. Pick the right hand up. You've got your fingertips separated, and place that right hand in the center of your mat to maybe where the thumbs are touching. If both fingers are separated all the way, take that right palm or the right foot just outside of the right leg. And what we'll do here is we'll be in a lunge. Okay. So try and create a 90-degree angle from your ankle to your knee to your hip. So that should be 90 degrees or like a 7 or an L, depending on how you're looking at this. And you don't want that right knee to go out any further than your ankle or your toes. So try and keep that right knee behind the right ankle, and then square your hips. So you want both hips to be in line, not where one's rotated more forward than the other. And the way to best do this is to bring that right knee back through the hip so that your left hip is pivoted more forward and you have your hips squared away, okay? And then you can begin to press the hips forward, again, without bringing that right knee over the right ankle. And we'll stay here for 3 minutes as well. So fear is healed by love. It's really about presence being the mechanism of reassurance, and it silences our fears, right? So if you're afraid of something, ask yourself, whatever the thoughts are you're having about the thing that you fear, what would your feeling be if you were to come at that from a different angle? So if the thing that you were scared of was actually the thing that you loved, how would you feel in your body? What would you say? What would you be saying? Right? So this looks like healing in community, a loving community at that. And this is so powerful because it also generates loving thoughts. We have loving relationships, loving feelings, and then we can also have loving thoughts in community shared among others around us, right? As we begin to let go of these blocks and resistances to love, one of which is in fact fear, we'll start to experience more of that love, and it starts to more so neutralize the fear. We have all the power to heal. This is internal. When people say like something's inside of you, or it's in you, you got this, right? Trust yourself. That's what they mean, right? And it may sound not real because it doesn't do anything for you. It doesn't solve any of your problems now. But when we start to look inside ourselves legitimately, we see that our perspective changes will have an impact on our feelings, and our feelings will start to have an impact on our thoughts. And that's going to begin to draw in other people around us who share those who share that when people talk about vibrations and energy, it's really about the emotional state that people are at baseline. Unconditional love is probably the most fortunate event of our lives. And this is per Sigmund Freud, as told by David R. Hawkins in the book Letting Go. Somebody who has more love inherently has less fear. And they also have more loving energy for themselves to be able to take more risks. When you are coming from a loving place, you will take more risks. Therefore, you might experience more rewards inherently. Here, we're going to go ahead and send our hips back. Begin straightening that right leg. Keep your hands on the ground. All right. Heel on the earth and then point the toes upwards. So we're going to just stretch out the hamstring briefly here as we send the hips back. Keep your hands on the ground. You can walk them forward. The goal here, I just cracked my back, is to just stretch out that hamstring. All right, now go ahead and lower the foot back down to the ground. Press the left hip down into the earth. And then slowly begin to bring your right knee back to the outside of the left. And we'll get ourselves in that posture the same way. Place the right hand down on the ground, both hips above the knees, left hand, separate the fingertips, bring those thumbs together, and then just step left foot out front. And then begin your lunge, being mindful that that left knee is not far out past the the left ankle, okay? So one block to emotional development is avoidance of the shadow. Fear of that shadow, according to Carl Jung, says that the self can't be whole without it. And this is where our truth is. When people say know your truth, they mean know your shadows. A lot of things that we don't like about the world, what happens is that when we acknowledge their existence, what they get quiet and they can no longer run us subconsciously. In fact, like there is only fear that gives this power, and then it projects onto the world around us. Think about anything taboo, movies, all the violence, aggression, and people and things telling us what we shouldn't do. And it's all entertainment, right? And our fear of the opinions of others might even keep us from looking at our shadow, because taking in their opinions as our own opinions is just something that we would naturally do. The reality is that we all really harbor these secret same fears because there's this shared unconscious commonality, especially in our environments and communities that we're in. They talk about also how humor can be useful, right? When we look at the truth, sometimes like being uncivilized, we can see the shadow, and we must recognize that as a signal, right? And I think this was one of the things where he talked about how ridiculous it is that if somebody does a thing, like our reaction perhaps being more violent than necessary. This is something that we all might think, but we know how ridiculous it is. And that's where the humor comes in. The energy behind keeping the shadow down, what happens is that we're losing so much energy that could in fact be applied to getting to a place of love just by surrendering. But we got to be willing to look at it, and we got to be willing to work with that fear that spills into all areas of life. And it limits us to the point of impacting our body's immune system, which we talked about before. We can take that same action out of fear with the same action out, or we can take that same action out of fear, out of love, because it fuels it with a completely different energy behind it based on the emotion behind our intention. Rather than acting out of fear of avoiding a thing, we can engage with a loving compassion and care for our fellow human beings. And that's where fear ends and guilt starts here. Go ahead and place the hands on the mat. Begin to extend that left leg. Press the hips back. Point the toes up towards your nose. We're just going to stretch out that left hammy a little bit. I wanted to do this in a little bit of a different way to have us move a little. Okay. And then you can begin to walk the hands forward. Press that right hip down and forward toward the earth. Okay. And relax. Take that left knee down to the mat next to the right knee. I'm going to go over the notes on guilt, but I want for you to go ahead into your final resting pose, lying down on your back completely in stillness. Let your palms rest open toward the ceiling in order to release and receive. We're releasing that which is stored into the body. Notice where you might feel any sense of electricity or aliveness. This will be where your awareness is in your body, especially as we begin to talk about guilt here, because so much of our fear uh, has some guilt associated with it. So, one form of fear, as David R. Hawkins says, is guilt associated with the feeling of wrongness or punishment. Like if we don't get a thing out there, then what happens is that we'll create it in here. And it's appropriate for looking out for traffic, right? Like you feel guilty for, walking across the street without looking and you get hit. And it's inappropriate for doing something scary, right? Like, and it's scary in the sense of not it's going to cause you harm, but it's something that you just feel that there's an inhibition, there's a desire for something. You want to do something, but fear being the thing, like, oh, I'm so scared of that. I'm scared of rejection. I'm scared of being told no. It's very useful to keep from making a mistake, but most guilt doesn't apply. And it is very invalidating of the self, of our worth as a human being when there is guilt, because there's always guilt that when we aren't doing the right thing or doing a thing better, it is just present. There is guilt of presence, being here in the moment because we're scared of it. There's guilt as denial of our own intrinsic inner innocence. This is in the words of David R. Hawkins, man. And that innocence is really why we bought into all of the world's negativity in the first place. Like the world is selling our smallness to us again and again via programming. And when we start to see that that's the case, what happens is that we become more conscious. As we look at what we've been told and we see that it's simply been attempts at controlling us, and we stop letting ourselves be controlled. And then when we become conscious through seeing this, consciousness starts to expand. Like when we start to engage with our emotions, we can start to make more intentional and aligned choices for ourselves. And we can start to see that we accept things daily, what those things are, and we start to question them. We can begin to disassemble, these big things into more fragments of our guilt and our fear and let it go. Freedom is being able to see what it is for exactly what it is: the chair, the table, the couch, the TV. We see these things objectively as they are. And we can start to recognize ourselves as the blank space where the programming occurs through media and opinions. And through this, we start to clear out that which we don't need, and we start losing the negative and accepting the positive. So why keep letting other people live off our energy that we give to that in fear and in guilt, when we can choose for ourselves and we can just cut them off for our power from our power, right? Like that's our power leaking. When we allow ourselves to be taken advantage of, the commercials, the advertising, the pop-ups, this is what the truth really is. And when we start to live in that truth, we become free and we can't be controlled. As we go further within and examine our emotions, our emotional responses to things, and we can separate our attachment of our identities to that which isn't true, that which isn't the truth, we become free and we just can't be controlled. I read that line already. But we start to let go more of fear, and that makes us lighter and life progresses. And as we discover more truth, we set ourselves free. All of our greatest teachers advise us to seek for ourselves, challenge everything, ask the questions. The quantity of fears begin to get relinquished, and we can see physical symptoms of illnesses and dis-ease disappear, renewing our life energy through just the freedom of guilt. There's science that healing occurs through the surge of life energy through the surrender of guilt. And one of those core drivers of guilt is religion. We can also have resentment develop for those who have surrendered guilt themselves. So, as we talk about fear, I think that perhaps it's easier to look at what we feel guilty of to identify what we might be afraid of, because guilt will keep us from taking an action. It would feel guilty. We'd feel guilty if we pursue a promotion at a job where we think someone's more deserving because of what other people said a person in that role may have, right? So I invite you to, for your homework assignment, look at something that you want to do and ask yourself, why haven't you done that thing yet? And when you ask why, answer the question. And when you get that answer, you're going to ask yourself why about that answer. And you'll keep doing this until you get to the core of the feeling. And if you have not taken action for something, it's going to be because I was scared. And ask yourself, what would happen if you got it? How would you feel if you got it? And whatever that answer is might be under the umbrella of guilt itself. And you'll see that perhaps the reason you haven't done a thing isn't because you're scared of it, but because you'll feel guilty if you were to be successful at it. So I invite you to try out that exercise. Feel free to lie here as long as you need to in your Shavasana, process this, take it in, and notice any changes in your body, your breathing, your mood after having completed this session today. And once again, I'm Courtney Brain. This is Self, the Letting Go series, Emotional Wellness for Men. I look forward to having you at the next one.